finally, for the SKOCH India Economic Lifetime Achievement Award, the award goes to Dr. M. Govinda Rao, Councillor, Takshashila Institution and former member of the 14th Finance Commission. India's policy discourse has immensely benefited from Govinda Rao's contributions in public finance and fiscal policy, and in particular, in the areas of fiscal decentralization and federalism. He was persuasive in ensuring that the 14th Finance Commission incorporated the planned requirements of the states, which resulted in the 10 percentage point increase in tax devolution. I'd like to invite Dr. Rao for his acceptance speech.
Mr. Samir Kocherji, my dear good friend Vivek Devroy, members of the SKOCH family, distinguished invitees, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to express my heartfelt thanks for honoring me with this Lifetime Achievement Award this year. To me, this has come as a great surprise, just as it must have come as a surprise for many of you. That's because I have always kept a low profile, and I never came from or have been a part of a high street, nor advertised myself in my works. Except for those with whom I had close interactions, not much is known of me. It must have taken a lot of effort to identify me too, and for the honor, I am grateful for those recommended. I believe Vivek was one of those who recommended me for this honor. To be sure, it has been a long and arduous voyage. Samir talked about his background, but he was at least in an urban area. If you have to come from a rural area, it's an entirely different thing to do. So he talked about the electricity bill. We didn't have to pay because there was no electricity. He talked about the water supply bill, the water supply difficulties. We didn't have proper water supply anyway, but then since it's a village, any water is fine. To be sure, it has been a long and arduous voyage, and often enough, I have completed 75 years, of which 50 years have been spent in research in economics. I came from a remote village in a coastal part of Karnataka with no roads or electricity. There was no clock in the house. And we had to guess the time for going to the school by looking at the position of the sun and length of the shallows. And often it used to rain a lot, and then it was just a random thing that you think that this is the time, and then you go to the school. My parents had no formal schooling, and my brother, who was the first matriculate in the family, had left the house for his higher studies to a far-off place a year before I was born. I used to see him only during summer vacations, and in many ways, he was my role model. I used to see him only, in fact, he was the one who eventually pioneered the satellite technology for this country by designing and producing Aryabhata, the first Indian satellite, and built an advanced space research in the country as a chairman of the Space Commission. There was no expectation from my parents, as far as education is concerned. They said, since the boy is passing, let him go to the school. When I completed my BA, I had to ask my brother to finance my higher studies. And he asked me to go over to Ahmedabad, where he was working in the physical research laboratory. The problem with the university was that even English language was taught in Gujarati there. So I had to learn my economics in Gujarati, which I didn't know. I am eternally grateful to all my teachers and colleagues with whom I learned a lot in my research career. Very interestingly, I started my research with Professor Lakdawala, who had taken over as the director of Sardar Patel Institute of Economic Research in Ahmedabad, and immediately after my MA, in fact, he invited me to join him. Later, I worked with a gentleman called Shiv Shankar Prasad Gupta, who had just returned from UK, from University of Leeds, and he was a student of Peacock and Wiseman, and possibly one of the best public finance experts. And he was in Sardar Patel Institute, but there were some problems, so he left over to Sambalpur University. And he persuaded me to go, and I was naive. After all, I was not one of those smart urban kids. So I decided to go to Sambalpur, only to realize that there was no research, either the research atmosphere, or research culture, or research infrastructure. So obviously I had to move all over the country to do my PhD. He persuaded me to join him, and I joined him, but it's only later, way back in 1977, when Dr. Chelaya started the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, he happened to see a couple of my articles and found out where I was and asked me to join the Sardar Patel Institute. I joined the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. I mean, in fact, it was housed in Rajendra Place, in one of those rented places. And it's from there I grew with the institute. I grew with NIPAP, and Dr. Chelaya was in that sense, he was my mentor, particularly on tax policy and reforms. Not that I agreed with many of the things that he said, and we used to always have constant arguments, but then he put up with me. Later I had the benefit of close associations with Richard Byrd, who was my real guide and critic. Wallace Oates at the University of Maryland, where I was a Ford Foundation fellow, a postdoctoral fellow, with whom I learned a great deal on fiscal federalism, because he was, in all the senses, he is the father of fiscal federalism literature. And Albert Breton, who was a great public choice theorist, and then I had a great friendship and a lot of interactions with him. In fact, he visited the NIPAP for a month. He visited the Institute for Social and Economic Change for a month at my invitation to interact with the faculty there. At NIPAP, I had great colleagues, notably Arindam Dasgupta, who was a critic and a sounding board. And he would call a spade, and that's a great quality. And of course, we had Amresh Bagchi, whose counsel was great on practical issues of tax policy. If there is anything of note I have done, it's all due to them. I would like to narrate two incidents where I did dabble in policy, which had a direct bearing on policy, besides being a backroom boy. In fact, most of the time we are backroom boys. The first was in 1993, way back, when I wrote a paper on taxation of services in the Asia-Pacific region for the Asian Development Bank Conference. My colleague Arindam Dasgupta, as usual, told me that the best place for the paper was the nearest trash can. But then I wanted a second opinion and sent it to Dr. Chelaya, who by then, after finishing the Tax Reform Committee 2 reports, was actually in the Finance Ministry implementing them at the invitation of Dr. Manmohan Singh, who was the Finance Minister. So I sent it to him, and then Dr. Chelaya always used to read whatever I wrote. And the next day he said, you come over. So I went to him, and he said, Govind, this is a very good paper. Now this is a good contrast to what. And he said, but then I want you to do one thing. I want you to write a note. Want you to write a note for me on taxation of services in India. Now, and then he said, I will give you 10,000 rupees for doing that. And I said, you keep your 10,000 rupees. I will write the note, but then give me time. He said, all right. If you don't want the money, you give it to the institute. After a week, he calls me and said that, where is the note? And I said, I was bargaining for time. Now I lost money as well as time. So he actually put one Mr. Gautam Ray to work with me. And in a few days' time, we prepared a note on taxation of services. And we suggested that, in the 7th schedule to the Constitution, taxation of services is neither in central list nor in the state list. Now, so we made a recommendation that the India could start a taxation of services, invoking Article 248 of the Constitution, which says that if it is neither in none of the lists, it goes to the center. And we suggested to begin with the 3 services, which are non-life insurance, stock brokerage, and telecom. Lo and behold, I didn't know that this was that important. For the first time in the taxation of services, the service taxation was levied in the 1994 budget based on this note. The second incident that comes to my mind was much later. I was made a chairman of the task force on taxation of services. Chairman of the expert committee on taxation of services. And that was this committee which actually said, tax all services, give tax credit to goods against services, services against goods. At the central level, reduce the number of tax rates in excise duty. And then when you give this tax credit to goods and services, it becomes a goods and services tax at the center. This is the first committee that actually made that recommendation. And I was asked to make a presentation to the task force on indirect taxes chaired by Kelkar. And Kelkar basically took, and then of course the second recommendation was give concurrent powers of taxation to states and work out the place of supply rules, at the same time take away the interstate sales tax or the central sales tax, so that the state can convert their value added, they were talking about the value added tax, that becomes a goods and services tax. So this is the second recommendation that was made, and this was presented to Dr. Kelkar, and Dr. Kelkar in his indirect tax report put the same recommendation, and he became the father of goods and services taxation. It doesn't matter who did it, but the point is that this particular thing came first from the expert group on taxation services. So I had the challenge and opportunity of reviving and advancing research in 2 institutions. In fact, somebody was yesterday mentioning that both the institutions when I took over were in a very bad shape. Things improved. And I left, and both the institutions got into bad shape. I mean, of course, it was revised again. And at least I had the satisfaction of creating some, in fact, for 14 years, 4 years in Institute for Social and Economic Change in Bangalore, and 10 years in National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. So this gave me it gave me an opportunity to work on a variety of themes with a number of younger colleagues. And I am grateful to them for putting up with me, in fact, putting with my often very unreasonable demands. At NIPIP, I initiated a refresher course training for university teachers in public finance. and during summer vacation, and that became a very, very popular course, and then a large number of university teachers attended them over a period of 8 years. But then this was stopped once my successor took over because he didn't have the time. But of course, I understand that now it is being revived, and I hope at least that will be a connection they will continue with the universities. Well, I have spoken long enough, and I do not wish to continue, but I wish to continue doing my research and writing. And let me once again thank Mr. Co-Chair, Dr. Deb Roy, SKOCH family for honoring me. Thank you very much.